thank you everyone for joining us for tonight's event. My name is Nick and I'm one of the event hosts here at Powell's Books. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. One of the many events we're looking forward to is Jonathan Evison in a conversation with Thomas Konstam about Evison's new novel, Legends of the North Cascades, on Thursday, June 10th. If you don't already do so, please follow us on social media. Tonight, we're absolutely thrilled to welcome Claire Fuller and Ron Rash. Claire Fuller was born in Oxfordshire, England in 1967. She has written 3 previous novels, Our Endless Number Days, which won the Desmond Elliott Prize, Swimming Lessons, and Bitter Orange. She has an MA in creative and critical writing from the University of Winchester and lives in Hampshire with her husband and 2 children. In her stunning new novel, Unsettled Ground, Fuller masterfully builds a tale of sacrifice and hope, of homelessness and hardship, of love and survival, in which 2 marginalized and remarkable people uncover long-held family secrets and, in their own way, repair, recover, and begin again. At 51 years old, twins Jeanie and Julius still live with their mother, Dot, in rural isolation in the English countryside. The cottage they have shared their entire lives is their only protection against the modernizing world around them. Inside its walls, they make music, and in its garden, they grow everything they need to survive. But when Dot dies unexpectedly, the world they've carefully created begins to fall apart. The cottage they love and the security it offered is taken back by their landlord, exposing the twins to harsh truths and even harsher realities. Seeing a new future, Julius becomes torn between the loyalty he feels towards his sister and his desire for independence, while Jeanie struggles to find work and a home for them both. And just when it seems like there might be a way forward, a series of startling secrets from their mother's past come to surface, forcing the twins to question who they are and everything they know of their family history. Joining Claire in conversation this evening is Ron Rash. Rash is the author of the 2009 Penn Faulkner finalist and New York Times bestseller Serena and Above the Waterfall, in addition to other prize-winning novels, 4 collections of poems, and 6 collections of stories. Twice the recipient of the O. Henry Prize, he teaches at Western Carolina University. So this evening's event will feature an audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question, as well as if someone has typed a question and you'd like to know the answer to it, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Most importantly, please consider supporting Claire and Powell's by purchasing a copy of her new book from us. A link to buy Unsettled Ground, along with Ron's books, will be shared in the chat a couple times this evening. Claire, Ron, we're thrilled to welcome you, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Well, Claire, I think we're going to have you start off by reading a little bit and move into a conversation. So,
yep, I'm very happy to do that. So, Nick explained a little bit about what happens in the book, but I'm not going to read from the very beginning. So just to kind of clarify exactly what this bit is about. So after Jeanie and Julius, 51-year-old twins, their mother dies, and they learn that there is overdue rent on their cottage, even though they thought they had an arrangement with the landlord. And because they don't have any money, they have decided to bury their mother's body in the garden and not tell anyone. So most of the book is from Jeanie's point of view, but this little section is from Julius's point of view. And the other thing I should say is there's a guy called Jenks who actually is a Scotsman, but my Scottish accent is absolutely appalling. So I'm going to just pretend that he's English, because then it just makes it easier. I won't specify it. In the shop, Julius dithers. He's low on tobacco and rolling papers, and he wants, no needs, a pint in the pub. What to do with the money from the guttering job? If he wants to get any work, he'll need credit for his mobile phone. He buys £10 worth and some tobacco. In the pub, he plugs his mobile in to charge. He sits at the bar next to Jenks, sips at a pint of bitter to make it last, and rolls a thin cigarette. Heard about your mum? Jenks, a scrawny man whom Julius has rarely seen out of the public bar of the Plough, tips his glass towards his mouth, and Julius sees his top lip reach out to the beer like a snail feeling its way. What a bummer, Jenks says when he's swallowed. Yup, Julius says, licking his cigarette paper, sticking it down. Thanks. He waves the cigarette at Jenks and goes out the back to smoke. He has a blister on his palm from digging, and he rubs the bubble of it across his lips, feeling the fluid move beneath the skin. He considers if there's a legal requirement for the depth of a grave. He wonders again whether they're allowed to do what they're doing. Sod it. He doesn't care if they aren't. He's taken off the turf and has gone down a spade's depth, which isn't enough. Won't be enough for Jeanie, and it would be an utter cock-up if the foxes started digging, or Maud. He rubs the bristles along his jaw, smokes his cigarette, thinks about what the Rawsons say is owing, again sees Rawson shout nothing up the stairs to his wife, remembers the contents of the envelopes in his coat pocket. Fuck it, he thinks, fuck it all. When he's back at the bar and another 10 minutes have passed, Jenks says, you got a text from that bit of totty who lives over the fish and chip shop, something about a boiler. Bloody hell, Jenks, read everything, why don't you? Shall I bring in my diary next time? Jenks smirks, and after checking his phone, Julius finishes off the rest of his beer in one open-throated gulp. Boilers aren't his specialism. He doesn't really have a specialism. He doesn't have his tall rucksack with him, but he wheels his bike through the village to Shelley Swift's. She's wearing a leopard print top and a denim skirt when she answers the door, and lilac lipstick that she surely doesn't put on for work. Bloody boiler, there's no hot water, she says as he follows her up the stairs. The boiler is on a wall in the kitchen, and as soon as he inspects the hole in the cover, he sees that the pilot light has gone out. He pushes 2 buttons, the gas ignites, a tiny blue flame shows through the hole, and they hear the boiler kick in. You're amazing, Shelley Swift says, and when he turns, she doesn't move back. Her nose and mouth are out of focus, but her eyes, lashes clotted with makeup and hazel irises with the circumference of a deeper brown, catch him and hold him. He wants to kiss her, but feels he is too tall, too stooped, all elbows and knees. He is unused to an encounter like this, out of practice. Can I use your toilet? He says, and she laughs that husky laugh and lets him go. In the bathroom under the window is a shelf unit crammed with books. He pulls one out. Just like her mother, the title reads in raised silver letters. Behind the words is a close-up of some scrubby bushes and a patch of bare soil. Just visible in the earth is a woman's ear with an earring through the lobe. He shoves the book back. On the landing at the top of her stairs, as he is saying that she should text him if anything else goes wrong, Shelley Swift kisses him, her mouth slightly open, her tongue touching his lips, and he's aware of the waxy greasiness of her lipstick. He doesn't exactly kiss her in return, too shocked by the feel and the taste of her. When they pull apart, she laughs once more, and he almost runs down the stairs and out through the door. All the way home, he rides his bike without holding on, as though he were 13 again, using his knees to steer so that he can hold his fingers to his nose and smell the lemony scent of Shelley Swift's bathroom soap.
Yeah, and, a wonderful book. I'm convinced I'm not going to read a better one this year. I really believe that. And it has everything I want: complexity of character, beautiful writing, landscape merging with, at times, seemingly destiny. As I was reading the book, a quote from Edith Wharton kept coming back to me. She talks about in one of her novels, the hard considerations of the poor. And again, when I was reading your novel, I felt that, because it's almost as if every decision, as in when you showed with the buying the drink, later we'll see Jeanie go to the store and have to really tabulate in her head exactly how much money she has. The funeral, and these people are always on the precipice, and I think you really rendered that so well, and something that I have not seen much, at least in the British fiction I've read in the last few decades. Your book's about the rural poor in England, and could you talk a little bit about why you focused on that, but also why is it so rare that we hear about that aspect of England?
Yeah, it's hard to know why it's so rare, but you're absolutely right. It is, because rather than I know lots of writers avoid reading fiction when they're writing, but for me it's almost the opposite. I try to find really good fiction and read it as if to kind of try and raise my game, you know, to try and write something better. And I try to find fiction that also covers the same subjects that I'm writing. And I found it really impossible. I didn't find anything that was quite right, was quite as much about the rural poor in England. And there's been a couple of books published since, but they still don't quite tackle it. There's lots of writing about urban poverty. And I've been trying to think why that is. I mean, it's probably partly to do with who is publishing books. You know, we talk about that a lot, you know, that certainly in this country we do, you know, that the people who work in publishing tend to be kind of middle class, certainly here. So the working class writing their own stories doesn't seem to be really happening, although there is a movement to kind of change that. But still, when I see that happening, it still is about urban poverty, and kind of big estates, council estates, London council estates, and how, you know, that those kinds of childhoods and life has been difficult, and it's still not about the villages. And I think maybe it's because in this country we just don't see them. We don't see them in the news. We don't see people struggling in the way that Jeanie and Julius does in literature or in film or in non-fiction. And yet they definitely still exist. They are there. But really, it wasn't like I set out to cover this subject. It was, the book started because I discovered a caravan in the woods, a dilapidated caravan, which I think Americans call camper trailers. So the thing that gets towed behind a car. And it was just left there and vandalized. And that was what kind of started the idea of the story. And probably the kind of person who would have had to live in that caravan in the woods is likely to be somebody who doesn't have very much money and obviously lives in the countryside. And so Jeanie was kind of created in my head. And once I knew that at some point in the book she would live in this caravan in the woods, then I knew she had to come from a difficult place and to go downhill in order to get there. Yeah, so that's really why rural poor.
Yeah. And you really made me, in a way I hadn't anticipated, how much we take for granted today. I was, as I was reading the book, that Jeanie cannot use a computer, that she cannot read, that they do not have an automobile. And so once again, there are all these things that I think so many of us, certainly myself, have come to think are just part of everyone's life. And that really struck me, it made me empathize deeper how hard it would be to navigate in the world without these objects, this kind of technology. I found that really interesting. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, once I'd realized the kinds of lives these twins were living, I did do some research, and it was kind of government papers about what was happening in the countryside and things like public bus services being reduced, and it didn't those papers didn't necessarily focus on particular individuals, but you could imagine what would happen, if a bus service is so reduced that you can get one, that it goes one day to a town, your nearest town, say, or your nearest city, but it doesn't return, it doesn't come back until the following day or something. So because these services are being reduced, and what effect that has on somebody who doesn't have their own transport is kind of devastating. And with libraries shutting and health centres shutting, and even down to public telephone boxes in England, now they are so rarely used that they are becoming little libraries, or they have I've forgotten the word for it, defibrillators, so in them, rather than phones. But if you don't have a mobile phone and you rely on those things, it's very, very difficult. And at one point, Jeanie really needs to use the phone, and she doesn't have a phone. So I became very aware of how difficult life can be in the countryside if you don't have access to those things. And I wanted to try and highlight that once I realized what the book was about.
Well, you really did. And I was equally impressed with how rich the interior lives of Julius and Jeanie are. I mean, you really, really get into their sensibilities. And I think one thing that I really admired about the book is that the complexity of the characters, but you never condescend. There's never a moment in the novel where I felt like you were almost looking at these people as if some kind of scientific study. You're inside their heads, and I thought that was one of the real strengths. And you reveal that their intelligence. I mean, Jeanie has a really strongly developed aesthetic sense. I mean, we see that with the music, but also with the garden.
Yeah, that was important to me because of her lack of education and how the education system has failed her. Or I think, quite possibly it's not, it wasn't diagnosed and it's not expressed specifically in the book, but I think she probably has some kind of dyslexia. So she can barely read and write. But it was really important to me to show her as an intelligent person who was capable of great skill and great learning. So she has all this knowledge about the vegetables and how to grow them and the seasons and how to look after each specific plant without any of that being written down. She just knows and understands the earth and the land and how to tend it. And also, how to manage different plots, because Julius wants her and her mother to turn the whole garden over to kind of one vegetable so that it would be much more efficient and they could make more money. But that is actually quite hard to control, and Jeanie realizes that if you grow one vegetable on a piece of land, then the next year it's very difficult to grow it again. So they resist that. And also the music, I think I wanted to show that she, it has some kind of aesthetic and a real skill, so much so that when she plays her guitar, people stop and listen. When she sings, she has the kind of voice that people stop and listen for. And I think for me, the music, because it is quite a sad book, and difficult things happen to this family, but I wanted something to lift it. for their sake and for the readers and really for mine, because otherwise it would be pretty relentlessly bleak maybe. But I think the music also provides that tiny little bit of hope at the end, because she has kind of possibly been spotted by someone who thinks that she has the potential for something else. I'm not sure that Jeanie is the kind of person that would actually take someone up on that, because she is so private, but it's nice that it's there, I think. So the music was really, really important in this book.
Well, yeah, to me, that was a really important moment for me, that, and the sense of triumph that she and Julius both had, that when the reception to it, yeah, that was a beautiful moment. There's a quote that I wanted to read and get you to respond to, because I think it's a very important one. Dr. Holloway says in the book, a physician that knows the family, in the end, it is impossible not to become what others believe you are. Dr. Holloway quotes Julius Caesar. And that struck me as a really important perception, because I constantly had this sense of Julius and Jeanie being kind of how they were observed from outside. And one thing that made, I think, the book truer is that it wasn't always with someone condescending to them or dismissing them, but I think there was always that sense that they knew very often, all too often, that in a sense, they were almost being pressed down to be this thing objectified.
Yeah, I think that also kind of sometimes happens in a village, that there are the eccentrics or the oddballs that Jeanie and Julius are, and people expect them to behave like that, and they become kind of observed and gossiped about, partly because I don't want to give anything away, but what happened to their father when they were 12 and what they saw happen, that, you know, has been village gossip for years, and that informs who everyone else thinks the children are. They're not children, but, you know, the children of Dot. And maybe they almost, in some ways, kind of grow into that because people expect it of them. So they become kind of more reclusive and therefore odder when they go out into public. But also that quote also comes from the original title of the novel was Just Like Your Mother, which got changed. So for me, you know, there is some repetition, again, without giving anything away, with what happens at the end, that Jeanie kind of takes on Dot's role. So, you know, that quote that Holloway says, it's also about kind of lives repeating and characters taking on a role that they saw, and yeah, that they saw and perhaps tried to resist at some points, but it just kind of takes them over.
Well, it was, yeah, I found it very powerful. And I actually, this Sunday, I recommended to a young novelist who is struggling with how much information to give, because there are several really, there are several mysteries in the story. I mean, several things that the reader and the characters, the main characters, do not know fully what about. And I was really impressed, and I told this younger writer that to read Unsettled Ground, just because, for what, I mean, specifically because you do such a great job of giving us just enough information to keep us reading, but you don't reveal too much. And I thought that was really, really well done. I mean, it just struck me how carefully structured the novel is. And how is that intuitive for you? Is that something that, as you draft, do your drafts, or how talk a little bit about the process of how you decide those things?
Yeah, for me, that that is almost the hardest thing with writing. You know, how heavy-handed am I being, or how subtle am I being with those kinds of clues about what might be coming, and the suspense and the mystery. I do always set out trying not to write a mystery novel. There is going to be no mystery in this novel, and then it kind of it seeps in, and I can't do anything about it. Just because I write things, because I don't plan. I think I start writing, and something comes. I write something, and I have no idea what it means. You know, Dot says something in the first chapter, and the first time I write it, I'm thinking, what? Who are you talking about? What is that? But I leave it in because it's the first draft, and you might as well leave everything in because you can take it out later. But then I think the subconscious starts to work, and then by the time I'm, you know, 2/3 of the way through, that thing at the beginning that I didn't understand pops up, and somehow a solution is provided. I don't understand how that works, but it often just works, and I have to just trust that it will work. But after
I've had the same experience.
Yeah. Can you explain it? How do you?
Well, I'll make an analogy, and I'm going to use you as an example, not myself. Michelangelo always believed when he saw the marble that the statue was already inside, and I work by pretty much intuitive. I usually have an image, but I always come to a place where it seems to die, you know, the novel's hopeless. And I think that's where it's almost like an act of faith that, you know, the story's there. You've got to convince yourself it's there. You just got to discover it. But it is, the more I write, the more mysterious it is, you know, where the stories come from.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's so hard to explain. When you try to express your process, I can't find the words for it, because things happen on the page, but I just don't know how they happen or why they happen. And sometimes I'm not even paying attention to them happening because I'm just writing. But anyway, I finished my first draft, and you know, it's a little bit of a mess. And then once I work out perhaps what the themes are, or once I understand what the mystery is or where the reveals need to come, then I'll go and edit and edit and edit. So for me, the creation of the book is in the editing rather than in that first draft or in any plotting or planning. But I do find it hard to know how heavy-handed or subtle I'm being, and the only way that I can check that is to have readers read it and say, oh, I guessed all that, or I have no idea what you meant. and then I can change it. But obviously, once somebody has read that once, then you can't use them again. You have to find another reader. You know, that's how I do that.
Well, I've heard this quote attributed to everyone from Muriel Spark to Francis Bacon, but the quote is that the role of the artist is to deepen the mystery. And it really struck me. The mother is only in the story, and I'm not giving anything away. In I think first 4 pages, we see her, or you know, just briefly, and enter her point of view. But to me, she is one of the most interesting characters, maybe for me, the most interesting, even though she in a sense has a presence throughout the book. But I think you do something that I find very often with many of the most interesting characters in fiction. And I think Shakespeare does this really well too, is there's always a sense that we can't quite understand this person totally. And I think that's true to human beings. I mean, there always seem to be these aspects of people we can't, as we go know them more and more intimately. But the mother really struck me that way.
Yeah, I think it's because we don't ever actually, apart from right at the beginning, see Dot on the page as a character. She's only remembered or talked about, and we see her therefore each time through the eyes of the person who's describing her. and she was obviously, as perhaps we all are, a different person, slightly different person to each different person that she came across. So, you know, the doctor says, oh, she was such a good woman, you know, really great Dot was, but then someone else reveals that she did a terrible, terrible thing that obviously the doctor doesn't know. So either she was, and I don't think she was manipulative, I think she was quite a complex woman and didn't always understand the consequences of her actions. And she just revealed different bits of herself to different people, I think, because the children see her very differently and then learn about a whole different Dot that they never even knew about later on. Yeah, I find her really interesting, and I am kind of sympathetic to what she did. But I know that lots of readers find her see her almost as the baddie of the book, which I don't, but other people might.
Well, I found it, as I said, very complex. But there's that moment where she brings in the, I mean, he's called a tramp, and the dignity that she has. I mean, that to me was a really interesting moment because we really see it. Yeah. You know, and that to me was a moment that really resonated through my whole sense of her through the novel. That little moment.
Yeah, well, that's great, because I didn't want her to be just as a baddie. She is a complex character who has sympathy for all sorts of people, and she teaches Jeanie a lesson. She allows this tramp into her house and feeds him, even though, you know, he's probably quite smelly and, you know, not somebody that you might want in your sitting room. But she teaches Jeanie that we should welcome everybody, whatever their circumstances. If they need feeding, need help, then we should give it, which is quite interesting because Dot refuses help from anybody. She won't take it herself, and she teaches Jeanie that as well, I think.
Well, I'm going to switch a little bit. I'm interested. When I read the novel, I didn't sense. I don't want to use the word influence because I don't think that's what it's about. But I felt a kind of kinship a little bit with Thomas Hardy, and because what we talked about earlier, that stories of the rural poor, particularly at least contemporary, are not really there in England. But could you talk? I'm interested in the writers you read early on that you felt like not necessarily, maybe influence is sometimes, I know, a clunky word, but I think you learn from those writers, or writers that inspire us.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. I'd be
interested. I think Thomas Hardy certainly has. You know, I'm not a person who really goes and reads a lot of classics, but Thomas Hardy is my exception. So I certainly wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to write a Thomas Hardy-esque novel. But I do love his writing for the nature writing and also for the characters. And he really puts his characters through the ringer. You know, you think about Tess in Tess of the D'Urbervilles. He's just so cruel to her. But I also, love his writing. And oddly, this is not really to do with his writing, but at the time that I was writing Unsettled Ground and the Jeanie and Julius live in a thatched cottage, I went to Hardy's cottage in Dorset. So their cottage is kind of a little bit Hardy's cottage, because there are 2 staircases in Hardy's cottage and there are 2 staircases in the cottage in Unsettled Ground. But that's kind of beside the point, really. Some other books. I mean, I didn't start writing until I was 40. So I was a reader for a long time before that. So, well, for the whole of my life before that. So I was probably influenced by all sorts of things without really thinking, I'm going to become a writer, so this is influencing me. There were all sorts of books and writers that I loved. So people like, well, perhaps specific books. We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I just, you know, like that for its kind of weirdness and darkness and its eccentric characters. A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. Don't know if you know that. It's a terrific book. It's absolutely wonderful. Yeah, just very short. It's a novella. Just a wonderful sense of kind of nostalgia of looking back and of the countryside as well. Lots of William Trevor. Really, really love William Trevor, his short stories and his novels. Yeah. Oh, lots of things. Lots.
Yeah, that's always a horrible question to be asked. I'm glad that my hearty comment was not too off base. You know, another aspect though that it ties into to what you just said is you really render that landscape so vividly. I mean, I have a real sense. I can see the cottage, but I can also see the garden. I can, you know, all of that is it's so visual, almost as if a painter is doing it. I mean, it became that vivid in my mind. That is, I think, another strength of your writing. And you know, I think landscape. I really think for me, landscape is very important, and to really give a full sense of the characters because landscape affects them, possibilities of lives. Could you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, certainly. And I know I've seen you talk about your novels and landscape affecting characters. And I think it works both ways. The landscape affects the character, and in certain circumstances, certainly with Jeanie and her garden, she can affect the landscape and how she gardens and what her garden is like is kind of suggests her character in the way that it's not particularly pretty, it's not neat, it's very functional, it's very practical, and she is that kind of woman. So she's not worried that whether it looks beautiful, but it just has to work enough to keep the rabbits out, you know. So I think it can kind of work both ways, landscape on character and character on landscape. But I really, when I start writing a novel, I'm trying to write a novel that I like to read. And the kind of novels that I like to read have a lot of landscape in them and a lot of nature writing and nature description. I love reading that because somehow it also takes me into the place, I think, more so than cityscapes. I can visualize it. And when I write, it does kind of flow out in my head in a very visual way. And so I'm writing what I'm seeing in my mind, I think. And I write not only what the characters can see in front of them, perhaps if they're describing it, but I also know what's behind them. You know, I really understand the 3 dimensions of the space they're in, even if it isn't clearly described. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have that sense that, I mean, not a sense, I see these places vividly. I mean, I feel as if and this is what I love with a really good writer who writes about a sense of place, is that you really feel as if you visited that place. I mean, you've been in that landscape and certainly did that. And there was one detail that I loved about the Jeanie, the fire, and as a Southerner, I know that's a hard word for me to say, F-I-R-E, fire. That they keep the fire going, they're through a lifetime, and that's such to me said so much about them. I mean, it reveals certainly their poverty, but it also, to me, it really became emblematic of this of who they were, and that idea of never really surrendering despite things.
yeah, that, and also their kind of sense of history, I think, as well. You know, that their parents lived in this cottage. I mean, that their grandparents didn't, but you know, there is a sense of continuity, I think, that's keeping the fire alive, the same fire alive, helps with that, I think. But then obviously they have to leave. They are evicted from their cottage, and that fire goes out. And there is a morning when Jeanie realizes that the stove is cold, you know, so a kind of metaphorical thing going on with the fire as well. Yeah.
No, that was impressive. As I was reading this book, you may not know this, but in the United States, in the Southeast United States, there was a gas shortage last week. And it was amazing to me to see how thin the veneer of civilization is, because people were just panicking. And as I was reading the book, I thought, well, you know, Jeanie and Julius would have no problem. And you know, their ability to be self-reliant really is to me one of the most admirable aspects of their characters. I mean, if the grid goes down and the computers go, they're going to be fine.
Yeah. They are. They'll just get on their bikes and cycle off somewhere and go and pick up some eggs from their chickens and pull up a few carrots, and yeah, people will be round at their house, I think.
Oh yeah, and I no, that really was an interesting kind of situation to be in, reading that book. And it also kind of ties into me that at times at this book, and I think it almost had at times almost, you know, ballads are so important in the novel. I think, you know, in a sense, they're almost a counterpoint at times to what's going on. But I really was, you know, just impressed with the way the book almost felt, at some times it felt like a much older culture kind of emerging into this, you know, 21st century world. And I found that can, you know, that sometimes a clash, but sometimes more like an emergence and a, you know, a resilience of that, of what's best of that kind of you know, rural world and self-sufficient world. That to me was a really interesting aspect.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. There is something very appealing about being self-sufficient and kind of going back to the land and going back to our forebears and being able to sustain ourselves without stuff. It, you know, personally, I find the amount of stuff we have and the amount of times we feel we have to change our phone because there's the latest phone, you know, I try really hard to resist all that, although I cannot resist the stuff of books.
Yeah.
I do buy books and books and books. But I think, but it's funny because however appealing it is, I think perhaps in Unsettled Ground it shows that the idyll is very superficial, maybe, and below that there is just hard scrabble, you know, to keep going. I think maybe it's hard because when the two worlds meet, and you know, if you do need some help from officialdom, if you don't have technology, you can't access it. So it's very, very hard to be completely self-sufficient and cut off, I think.
Yeah. Well, we have a very good writer named Wendell Berry who talks a lot about agrarian, and I was thinking of him. You may not know his work, but that idea of you know, self-sufficiency of farming and those characters brought that up. We haven't talked about Julius, and he's also an intriguing character, and you know, his relationship, particularly with Jeanie, because in some ways there's a sense that because of what we perceive about her health, that his obligations toward her, yet at the same time, there's that part of him that wants to escape it. I thought that was a very interesting and complex relationship that they had.
Yeah, that's partly why I made them twins, because obviously not identical twins, but for the first 51 years of their life, they have been in a very similar place. I mean, Julius has gone out to work a little bit, but he has really been at home with his mother and his sister. And I think his mother very subtly has kind of laid a duty of care on him for him to look after his sister, and he feels that. And then when Dot dies, I wanted to show that they do both start going off in different directions and want different things. And Julius realizes suddenly that there is a whole world out there, and there is the potential of relationships and women and all sorts of things have open up for him. And Jeanie just wants to remain where she always has been and kind of pull him back. And she worries that she's going to lose him to a woman. And it doesn't work out quite like that. Yeah. Try not to give anything away.
Yeah, we're getting some questions now, so I'm gonna go let our audience in on this. Here's your first question. Your mention of Trevor. How does your approach to writing differ when creating a short story versus a novel?
Yeah, they're like obviously completely different things. I don't have any novels that I haven't finished. I've 4 published novels, 4 finished novels, although 4.5 because I've written half the other one, the next one. But I have so many unfinished short stories. For me, somehow, I find it very hard to see the arc of a short story. I can see it with a novel. As I'm coming towards the end just seems to happen naturally. I don't struggle with endings in novels, but I really struggle with them in short stories. I mean, I don't know how it is for you, because you write both. Be quite interested in what's the difference for you.
Most of the people I know, writers I know who write short stories and novels will say that writing a really good short story is harder. That's not about the amount of time, but it's just, it demands so much. I mean, it demands to me a lot of times what you get, the narrative drive of a novel, yet the poetic, sensibility of, saying so much in such a few pages. But I think it's a very different experience. Now, your third question is, Claire, do you get any say about your titles or art cover? Which is interesting because you mentioned earlier you had an earlier title for your book.
Yeah, I do get a say, and in fact, my UK publishers liked Just Like Your Mother, but it didn't work in the US for various reasons. And I could have decided on a different US title, but for me, I think it makes so much sense to have the same title across all English-speaking territories, especially with social media. It's very complicated to have different titles in different countries. So I was happy to let Just Like Your Mother go, and came up with Unsettled Ground, and everybody was happy with that. So you do have to make sure your publisher is also on board with the title, but most of the time the titles have been mine. In fact, all of the time. It's just sometimes I've had to change it for various reasons. So with Bitter Orange, it was Blood Orange for all the time I was writing it, and then even when it was bought by my publisher, and then just as it was bought, someone else released a book called Blood Orange, which was a big thriller, so I had to scrap my title. But the cover, the American cover of Unsettled Ground is so beautiful. Yes. And I do leave it up. I leave it up to my publishers because they have always done an amazing job, and I think they're probably much better qualified than me to get it right. But I just absolutely love it. And it's actually a sculpture. It's a photograph of a sculpture. Can I remember the name? Oh yes, Valerie Hegarty. She makes very unusual sculptures.
Yeah, it's a strong cover, and that is important to us as writers. You want that cover, and sometimes you have to fight for it. Got a question that in a way you've answered, but I want to go ahead and read it since it was sent in. Related to the cottage and the landscape, was there a model so vividly described and evoked? So the question is from someone who's read the book. So if you want to talk.
So was there a model? Sorry, for the cottage.
Was there, and it's not just the cottage, which you mentioned you'd use a party, but also the landscape.
Yes, so it's based on an actual place, which is the North Wessex Downs, which for anyone who knows England is just to the west of Newbury. It's an area of outstanding natural beauty, which means the government have specified it as that, and it is kind of rolling chalk downland, farmed, and some kind of common land as well. But I went there because I decided that was the place, and I thought it was going to be a village that actually exists called Inkpen, because I just thought that's such a great name for a village. Yeah. And anyway, I went there, and it was just slightly too posh. It was too wealthy for my kind of village. So I went west into Wiltshire, and I came across a village called Shalbourne, which seemed very right, but because I change it and talk about the characters in it and I mess around with it, I didn't use Shalbourne. I created the name of a village called Inkbourne, taken from Inkpen, and so kind of mixed it all up. Yeah.
Good. All right. Our next question is, who are your favorite authors? And I'm glad they're asking you that, and not myself. Because it's always a terrible question to be asked, but this is not my fault. This is a question.
Yeah. So. Do you know what? It's really hard for me to answer that in terms of authors, because I have favorite books. Mm-hmm. I don't like the whole of an author's work normally. It just kind of doesn't work like that, and you always have favorite ones. So on my Instagram account, I keep track of the books that I read, and I show pictures of them at breakfast. And so last year I had, I think it was the 3 favorite books I read last year. I'm trying to remember what they were, because that would kind of answer your question in a roundabout way. There was The Hare by Melanie Finn. That was really great. Bear by Marion Engel. Have you read that, Ron?
No.
That's a very interesting book.
I'm writing down these titles as you speak, because I think one of the great things about hanging out with other writers, which I don't do much, but occasionally I get out of my area. But when we talk about writers we've read, and it's wonderful to exchange the writers we're excited about. Yeah.
So Bear is an odd one. It's about a Canadian woman who goes to an island in Canada and meets a tame bear, proper big bear, and has a relationship with him. But lots of lovely nature writing in it too.
That's good enough. I think you've done your duty and given us a couple of books. First, I wanted to congratulate you on the Women's Prize nomination.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm absolutely delighted, obviously, because I've been following this prize for many, many years as a reader, when it was the Baileys, and before that it was the Orange Prize. And there's some, other great books on the shortlist. And of course, it would be really, really nice for Unsettled Ground to win, but the announcement is at a real life, supposedly we're hoping, a real life party in London. And I don't care if I win, I just want to go to a party.
Yeah, well, I suspect that, well, if I had a vote, I know what I would vote for, so I will leave that. I think we're winding down here. Is that right, Nick?
Yeah, we're getting to the end, for all that. If you have anything last to say, feel free to say it. So, but
well, I've enjoyed it. I've got a couple of new books to read writers I haven't read, and I'm so glad we could do this. And I'm so glad that I read this book, Unsettled Ground. I've got a new writer that is an important writer, and thank you, Claire, for the book and the experience.
Yeah, well, it's been a great evening. It's been lovely to chat to you, and I am a huge fan of your writing too. So it's lovely. It's been really great fun.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us and everyone here tonight, and for great questions and all that. So please consider purchasing a copy of Unsettled Ground here, and also Ron's books. I have one of his here. But there's a lot of this is in the Valley. But these, yeah, please consider purchasing a copy of those. I sent links on there. You can also find their works just through us on powells.com. And while you're there, please check out our lineup of virtual events coming up. And just thank you both again so much for this great talk and for joining us tonight. Cheers.
Very much. It's been a pleasure.
All right. And good night, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.